Wait, hold on, don't click off. Though based on my retention statistics, a quarter of you already have. There is still a PowerPoint here. And April Fool's calls for some elation, so thank you for attending my PowerPoint presentation about Sparkle. I'm not that funny as a person though, so unfortunately it'll be about as serious as my regular ones. Perchance. Sparkle is one of the masked fools. She played a big role in Penacony's main story. She also has a habit of dropping foreshadowing in some of the weirdest places. She also does appear to know basically everything that's going on, like way more than you would expect from a mere masked fool. She's probably not the Eon itself, even if she calls herself the Elation. She is fairly likely an emanator though, given how absolutely perfectly she embodies the Elation. That said, it isn't impossible for her to be the Eon, since that would be hilarious and therefore in line with Aha's Prima Mobile. In-game, she is a very strong hypercarry buffer. I don't usually make a whole extra slide to go into story, but Sparkle's involvement in Penacony is so well hidden and really fascinating. And also, by the way, Aha wants Tor the Express to, so, do keep that in mind. There was a lot of hate for Sparkle on her release due to that scene with Aventury. But if you actually examine what she says and does on a deeper level, you'll see a lot more hiding between the lines. Like in that scene with Aventury, you can see that she was indeed giving Aventury a hint, albeit in a very roundabout way, and also not localized properly to English. If you look at what Sparkle does and the impacts of her actions, you notice that first off, she warns us about Firefly hiding her identity. Although Firefly turned out to be friendly towards us to the end, she was indeed hiding her identity, which was pretty important. She shows us how absurd any given dreamscape can be, while disguised as Sample through that dream bubble of like Tatalon and whatnot. She sends us straight to a child's dream to investigate there. She gives Aventurine a few hints to uncovering the truth, with both in that one scene and later on after he gets consecrated by Sunday. And then she uses that bomb thingy with the buttons to save Firefly or something. I'm not super sure on that one. And this is more speculation, but she probably also worked with Gallagher to send out the invites for the whole Charmony Festival thing. Her involvement also tends to foreshadow upcoming content too. You might not have noticed, but in her trailer, which was released in the middle of 2.0, we see her fighting the past and the future. Two enemies that were actually only later introduced in 2.2. In Firefly's trailer, released just before 2.3, he is seen fighting a howling casket, which has a reddish aura, which is a sign of Sparkle's involvement. You'll also see a Sparkle doll for like a frame or two, and again, the Howling Casket was only introduced to the actual game in 2.4 and has been the bane of my existence ever since. Also, after you finish a 2.3 Trailblaze mission, he will drop this piece of foreshadowing seemingly out of absolutely nowhere, which in hindsight we now know matter 3 versions later in 2.6. So basically, whenever you see Sparkle, pay very close attention to what she may or may not be foreshadowing. In terms of base stats, she is very bulky and has very low energy cost, which is fine for her build. And her energy cost is actually the lowest of all Harmony, which is great for dance and dance shenanigans as well as general all-up time. Her basics are basic. It generates 1 skill point and 20 energy, which is identical to most other basics. Her skill advances one ally's action by 50%. It also gives that ally crit damage equal to 1/4 of Sparkle's own crit damage plus 45% for 1 turn. This cannot advance Sparkle's own action. This costs 1 skill point and generates 30 energy. Generally speaking, at the 200% crit damage benchmark, which is the standard for action advance supports, namely herself, Sunday, Bronya, and Rimblazer, this is a colossal 95% crit damage buff. Typically, you have her running at 160 speed and skill spamming on an ally that has 80 speed or higher, which is literally the entire cost, even with Poet, and having that character run at 160 speed without needing to sacrifice attack and crit. If you want more details on this, I made a video about speed and action value dynamics a while ago, so you can check that out. When Sparkle is just on the field, the max skill points cap is raised by 2, for a total cap of 7 skill points. For every skill point consumed by any ally, all allies gain 6% damage bonus lasting for 2 turns and stacking up to 3 times. This is basically a permanent 18% damage bonus for the entire team. Her ult recovers 4 skill points and gives all allies Cypher for 2 turns. While allies have Cypher, the talent's damage bonus increases by 10% per stack. So this increases that mediocre 18% damage bonus to a pretty impressive 48% damage bonus. This costs 110 energy. With an ERR link rope and sometimes a 5% ERR planar, she can fairly reliably get a 3-turn ult rotation, which is relatively fast compared to most other harmonies, because again she has the lowest energy cost. Her technique gives all allies misdirection for 20 seconds. Characters with misdirection will not be noticed by enemies. When entering combat during misdirection, she recovers 3 skill points. This is retained when switching characters, if it's not clear. Her A2 trace regenerates 10 energy when using her basics. It's not really relevant except for one specific rotation, which is basic spam, if you want like 7 skill points over 3 turns. But in general, it's basically irrelevant. Her A4 trace extends the duration of her crit damage buff from her skill from the end of that turn to the start of that character's next turn. This matters mostly for follow-ups and ults that occur outside of a unit's own turn. It's not quite the 2 turns of Sunday, but it's pretty good. Her E6, first off, gives all allies 15% attack passively, and additionally, when there are 1 or 2 or 3 quantum type allies, including herself, all quantum type allies gain an additional 5% or 15% or 30% attack passively. Though, like many guide makers have long emphasized, this does not restrict her usage to exclusively quantum allies. Since her massive crit damage buff, her damage bonus and action advances still apply to any ally. Her E1 extends Cypher's duration by 1 turn for a total of 3 turns. Cypher also additionally gives all allies 40% attack. If you remember what I said earlier about it being a 3-turn ult rotation, this generally means that Cypher is permanent. Her E2 allows each stack of her talent to ignore 8% of enemy defense. By this point, all allies should have a permanent 48% damage, 55% attack, and 24% dev ignore while Cypher is up. Plus, one ally also gains effectively 160 speed as well as 95% crit damage, which is already a lot. Her E3 gives plus 2 trace levels to her skill and plus 1 to her basics. Her E4 allows her ult to regenerate 1 more skill point for a total of 5. The skill point cap is also further raised by 1 for a maximum of 8. This may not seem like a ton, but with her skill spam rotation for a 3-turn ult, she uses 3 skill points and generates 4 skill points over 3 turns, making her overall net positive by only 1 skill point per 3 turns. With E4, she now spends 3 skill points and generates 5 over the same 3 turns, making her overall net skill point positive by 2 skill points every 3 turns, effectively doubling her skill point positivity. Do take note that this counts Sparkle's turns, and that is also already generally much faster than the rest of your team. Her E5 gives plus 2 trace levels to her ult and talent. Her E6 increases her skill's crit damage buff by an additional 30% of her crit damage, increasing it from 95% to 155% at the aforementioned 200% crit damage. Also, when she uses her skill, that buff will also apply to all allies with Cypher. Also, when she ults, if any ally has a crit damage buff, it will be applied to all allies. This is basically just to say that this crit damage buff is hugely increased and is team-wide now. Assuming that Cypher is permanent, which accounting for E1, it probably is. So by this point, poor financial decisions aside, your Sparkle now provides all allies 161.4% crit damage, 52.2% damage bonus when counting from the trace levels from E3 and E5, 55% attack, 2 skill points every 3 turns, and 1 ally running at 160 speed, which, needless to say, is a huge amount of buffs. Sparkle is a very powerful Harmony unit, released primarily for hyper carry teams. But she was released in a really awkward position, just too late for hyper carry, yet perfectly sandwiched between Dot and Break, so she didn't really have a time period of dominance like Rane, Robin, and Sunday have. Looking at her kit and comparing it to modern characters, you can really see the complexity creep as the game goes on. Especially compared to the newest Quantum Harmony Trippy, you can see that kit is way more complicated than this one. Sparkle calls herself the most honest person in Pentagony, and looking at it objectively, that's not that far off. Like, she may not be direct, but she is honest. There was also one time she crossed over to HI3. Perchance. Right, hope you enjoyed, and happy April Fools. You have no choice. You might as well check out my other PowerPoints if you're watching this one if you haven't already. So let me know what other videos you want to see me make, HSR or otherwise. Right, bye.